Coming up on this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society, we play the Song of Time to heroically save ourselves from the follies of our youth. It's dangerous to go alone, so the Nintendo Cartridge Society goes with you. Welcome to Nintendo Cartridge Society. My name is Patrick Ellers, and I am joined, as I am always joined, by my co-host, Mark Mitchell. Mark, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. My husband and I, we purchased an outdoor grill a few weeks ago. And
now I was just off mic asking about your fire starting abilities, and you said, no, you cannot start a fire.
That's right.
Like in a campfire situation.
Absolutely not. I would die and starve.
Right. But this, I assume this grill is not like a charcoal briquette.
Not at all.
Okay.
No. This is a light them up, crank up the gas, hit the fuse.
Right.
Also, important note.
Yeah.
My husband is the one who's been doing the grilling because he's very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I haven't had to try.
Oh, so you think that it's possible that like you could be really good at it? You just haven't. You're not a coward. You just haven't been tested.
That's I suppose it's possible, and really, I think it's best that I never try to find out, and I can just live in this delusion forever.
So, but what are you having like great grilled dinners all the time?
We more than I thought, because I was convinced. I'm like, we're gonna buy this grill,
right? And never use it again.
We had it shipped to us. We had to assemble it ourselves. It was really windy, so like we'd be like assembling it, and then there's just this gust of wind would just blow everything everywhere. And so, but no, I was wrong. I hate to admit that, but I was wrong. And we've actually had pretty good use of the grill. And it hasn't exploded yet. So I think we put it together acceptably.
Here's the thing with your husband. He likes hot things.
He loves hot things.
He loves hot things. He and I bond over liking hot tubs, hot saunas.
That's right.
Hot things that you don't necessarily...
Hate them.
You hate them. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say you don't necessarily like, but you just upgraded it straight to hate them. Well, speaking of hot things that you can either not like or hate, my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch, would you like to borrow it? You certainly can. All you gotta do is email us at Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com and give us a mailing address where we can send you my copy of Sonic Forces for the Nintendo Switch. You play it for as long as you want. You send it back. It doesn't cost you anything because I pay for postage both ways.
It's the perfect program.
It's the perfect program. There may be a copy of Untitled Goose Game in there. And, that's something that we're looking into, but it turns out that cannot be fixed because it is, in fact, part of a perfect program, and what is perfect cannot be fixed.
I also think that we've been doing the Sonic Forces borrowing program for so long that new listeners might come in and wonder, like, is this a real thing? And
yes.
I assure you, this is an actual real thing that happens. This is not a bit.
It's not a bit. It is a real thing that all you have to do is email us. And then you go on the list. And then when your name comes up, and look, is there a long list? Yes.
Well, when people get it, they take their time. They're luxuriating in the program.
Yes, that's right. But because it's a very good program. There was once upon a time we got an email, someone asking, why are you doing this? And there is no good answer.
No.
I have a copy of Sonic Forces and thought I'm not playing this anymore. I should share it with the world. And so
we saw the trailer for Pay It Forward once and we're like, yep.
You didn't see the movie Pay It Forward?
I know what happens in Pay It Forward, but I have not actually seen Pay It Forward.
I mean, here on the other side of Kevin Spacey being outed as a monster, I think that's all well and good. You need not actually see that movie. But yeah, it's really It's not good. It's not a good movie.
Well, here's something that is good. You can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We appreciate it so much. It helps people find the show. It helps grow the Nintendo Cartridge Society. If you leave us a 5-star review on the US Apple Podcast Store, we see that and we will give you a shout out on the show. If you leave us a review anywhere else or you share the show in some other way, let us know. Send us an email, hit us up on Twitter. We would love to give you a shout out.
We did get an email from, I'm sorry, Mark, I'm springing this on you. We got an email from Robin, who left us a 5-star review on their podcast app of choice, which is Podcast Addict. Robin says, very customizable, great for managing heaps of podcasts. So maybe that's one that I should check out.
Yeah, we should mention that Patrick doesn't like Apple Podcasts.
I do not like Apple Podcasts.
But has not found something that better suits his taste.
Okay, Robin says doesn't really want a personal shout out, or doesn't specifically want a personal shout out, but if we could shout out their website, which is icondesignstudio.com.au. They make random collections of quirky things from licenses, so check that out, and it's icondesignstudio.com.au. Icon is IKON, not ICON. All right, great. Thank you, Robin, for reviewing us on.
I know you didn't ask for a specific shout out, but you're going to get one anyways.
You got it anyway. Also, March, which is coming upon us so soon, is Kirby month. We're getting a brand new Kirby game, and Mark and I are going to spend the whole month talking about Kirby. So if you have Kirby games that you would like us to play, if you have Kirby memories that you want us to incorporate into the show that month, please email us Nintendo Cartridge Society at gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter or wherever you can communicate with us. We know a little bit about Kirby. We've got a little bit of experience, but we need more. We need your precious knowledge and your precious experience.
We are hungry for knowledge.
That's right.
We want to learn. We're desperate. We're like little baby birds with our mouths open. Just
tweet
waiting for you to regurgitate your Kirby knowledge into our mouths. Into our brain mouths.
And that is like a reverse Kirby, right? Because Kirby is normally sucking things out. You have to reverse your Kirby experience into our baby bird mouths.
That is a euphemism that I'm going to use for vomiting. For
reverse
now,
Kirby.
Yep.
It's very good.
Sorry, I spent the whole evening reverse Kirbying.
The whole evening.
Yeah, it was a bad night.
All right, Mark, we have a thankless task ahead of us, so let's just get into it. We are re-ranking the console Zelda games. All right, so Mark, we originally did this on May 16th, 2017.
Coming up on 5 years of our original ranking of the Zeldas.
And when we investigated it earlier this evening, we discovered that this was our very first ranking.
Wild.
We were wee babes in the podcasting game at the time. And we decided we are experienced enough. We should rank all the console Zelda games. Now, mind you, we set ourselves there was the limit there where we were like, we're not going to do any of the handheld only games. So, Link's Awakening and the Phantom Hourglass and, a bunch of the Oracle games, not in there. So we did a pretty good job ranking 9 console Zelda games. I would say that we, in addition to just doing console games, we sort of left it to just mainline games as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know if we're going to keep doing that or if we're going to add some games in.
Yeah, we haven't talked about it.
We've got to figure out what we're doing here. A couple things that I would like to point out about this list. Should we run through what the list was?
Yeah.
Okay. So almost 5 years ago, we ranked the games in this order. At number 9, Skyward Sword.
Number 8, Zelda 2.
Number 7, The Legend of Zelda.
Number 6, Ocarina of Time.
Number 5, Twilight Princess.
Number 4, Wind Waker.
Number 3, Majora's Mask.
Number 2, A Link to the Past.
And number 1, Breath of the Wild. So it's a pretty good list. I think I agree with a lot of it-ish off the bat, with some obvious exceptions. Places where I'm like, well, hold on a minute. Do we know anything about this game? Skyward Sword. But back in November 15th, 2018, we did an episode where we went through all of our definitive rankings and determined which of them were still definitive. And this one, not definitive.
No, we did not hold it in high enough regard. We had doubts.
Yes, we did have doubts, just like that play, Doubt. And so we at the time didn't really say like this is not right for, because that something was in the wrong order, right? We didn't identify what was wrong with the list. We did say that we did not solicit listener feedback to see what the listeners thought. We have still not really done that here. But I think we can maybe come at this with a little bit more knowledge and age and experience. This also will be us ranking these games not within like 60 days of Breath of the Wild being released. So was there recency bias at play in the original list? Who knows?
Yeah, I guess we'll find out.
Couple other things to consider here. Mark, in the last 5 years, have there been any new console Zelda games?
Well, so one thing we need to consider is, do we count Link's Awakening, the Link's Awakening remake for Switch that was released in 2019? Do we now count that in a list of console Zelda games?
A great question, right? Because it is, oh boy, it is the most like recent version of the game. It's maybe not the most accessible version of it because you can play the Game Boy version on virtual consoles, but not on Switch. So maybe not. Yeah, I don't know. I sort of think that we do have to.
I think we can. I agree with that. I think we include it for now. We can always change our minds later.
Yep.
But yeah, I think it does make sense to include Link's Awakening. Now, they're the more like spin-off titles, right? You have like one title we did not include in our original list was Four Swords Adventures for the Nintendo GameCube.
Yes. And
other the Hyrule Warriors game. So when we did our original list, the original Hyrule Warriors,
we also did not include Link's Crossbow Training.
Oh, right. The 5th best-selling Zelda game of all time.
Well, and
in North America.
That's right. And this is important because that was before we like memeified that game amongst ourselves. Before we learned that it was the 5th best-selling Zelda game in North America. And so, we weren't talking about it at the time. So the question there is like, should that also be included in this list, along with the Hyrule Warriors games, one of which has come out in the last 5 years
and is directly connected to Breath of the Wild.
Right.
I say no. I say no to any of the spin-offs, including Link's Crossbow Training, even though it is the 5th best-selling Legend of Zelda game in North America.
I mean, I'm tempted to agree with you, if only because I have not played a second of Link's Crossbow Training or Four Swords Adventures. Have not played a second of them.
I also think that it's kind of like apples to oranges at that point.
How do you mean?
The spin-off games are nothing like mainline Zelda games.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know how we do a fair comparison. I can tell you right now, they'd all be at the bottom of the list for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like the Hyrule Warriors games, like the Musou games, would be probably higher than the other two. But I mean, yeah, then still like kind of a far cry from like whatever we end up putting at the bottom of this list.
But we'll never know for sure because we're not ranking them.
All right. So I am removing the amiibo from the table that would have represented them. We are back to our old roots, are using amiibo to represent the various games in the Legend of Zelda series. And I gotta say, Mark, I do a pretty good job of having amiibo from like every single game in the series.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got 10 games to choose from here. Oh, so we did get an email from Xander, who was concerned about us re-ranking the Zelda games. He says, re-ranking the Zelda console games is a real problem. And then he goes through the games that we may have to add that we've already discussed. And then he says, And you guys said last year that Link to the Past is a perfect game. So for that reason, Link to the Past is number one for him. And then he goes on to give the rest of his ranking. I'm not going to read it as to not unduly influence our own ranking. But I guess just serving it back up to us that we have very recently referred to Link to the Past as a perfect game.
And I think that's a very fair point. I will also say that the Sonic Borrowing Program is a perfect program. So, need I really say more?
What do
we throw perfect around?
Oh, I see. We're casting dispersions on our use of the word perfect. Okay, I get it. All right, this is tough, Mark. We now have 10 games before us. Let's run them down in chronological order, just so we know what we're talking about. Starting at the beginning, there's The Legend of Zelda.
Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link.
Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past.
Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening.
The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time.
The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask.
The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker.
The Legend of Zelda, Twilight Princess.
The Legend of Zelda, Skyward Sword.
And The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild.
Okay, Mark, where would you like to begin? At the top of the list, at the bottom of the list? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Also, before we dig into that, I just want to lay it out here. I want this to be bare that part of the reason that we're doing this is to put a little pressure on you to finish playing Skyward Sword.
That's right, and I am really close to finishing. I really am. I played
to finishing.
I played.
Right.
Yeah, I played some over the weekend. I am one dungeon away. I'm in the end game.
Okay, good. I'm excited for you to have a full picture of that game, but I think already last time we had Skyward Sword at the bottom of our list.
Yeah, so we had Skyward Sword at the bottom of the list. I actually went back to our original ranking to listen to our discussion of Skyward Sword because in it we kind of do a lot of bad talking it without having actually played the game.
Which perfect, great.
Right, we make a lot of
I love it.
I mean, yeah. So one thing that I thought was very interesting though is in the episode you say, well, maybe in 5 years there will be a remake of Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword that fixes a lot of the problems, and we'll have to reevaluate this and see if to rank it higher. And I've got to tell you, after playing Skyward Sword right now, being close to finishing it, my perception of Skyward Sword is so different than what it was before playing the game, because I felt like Skyward Sword at the time when we were recording this episode had a really negative reputation in general.
Yes.
And so even with the HD remake coming out, I feel like there was some skepticism. I was definitely a little bit skeptical. I was like, I don't really know what I'm getting myself into with Skyward Sword. Am I going to like this? I have really, really enjoyed it. Is it, my favorite on this list? No, but is it way higher than the bottom? Absolutely.
Which is, man, I can't believe I said that. In the ranking episode, because first of all, it's funny that we were trying to talk about a game without really knowing anything about it. I believe at the time I had only played through, not even through the end of the first dungeon. That I couldn't even get that far on the original Wii release. And was trying to play it years after it came out. But it's amazing that I had the foresight to say there'll be some kind of re-release and we can recontextualize it. And then you just couple that with when I predicted that Nintendo was going to release new Game & Watches. I just it's
spooky.
Sometimes I'm an oracle, okay?
Well, maybe one way we can do this, this would be unprecedented, so maybe this is a terrible idea. But maybe one way we can do this is we start with Skyward Sword as our number one, and then we can just randomly randomly select other games and to compare it against each other to see where our final rankings come out.
All right, so this is the only time that it'll be like this, I am sure. But now, tentatively, the Skyward Sword, represented by our Zelda Loftwing amiibo, is going to be in our number one position. We will bring other games up against it to see whether we like them better or worse than Skyward Sword.
I do fear that last time we maybe had some recency bias towards Breath of the Wild because we had just finished it. could the same thing be happening with Skyward Sword? I guess
Absolutely.
history will really be able to judge. I think. Do you want? We've been talking about Skyward Sword, for the past few months as we've been making our way through it. But should we just say a few words about Skyward Sword
before we bury it? Yeah, I think it is worth talking about it, and I think also maybe worth talking about what we mean when we mention each of these games, because most of these games have been re-released in one form or another, right? And when we are talking about what versions of these games do we have in mind when we are talking about them here? Are we sort of approaching them holistically, or just like the most recent release, or the release that is truest to the console Zelda game thing that we're like, what do we mean?
Right. So for me, that's a good point, because Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, just like Skyward Sword, those have HD remakes that made adjustments to the game.
Yes.
Wind Waker especially made some adjustments to smooth out some of the rougher spots.
And just like the improved lighting in the game make the graphics all look like 1,000 times better, even though they looked great in the first place.
Ocarina of Time has a 3D remake.
As does Majora's Mask.
The difference between the two, I would say, is that the Majora's Mask 3D remake made some pretty drastic changes to bosses and stuff like that, which, to my memory, Ocarina of Time did much less of. It's not so much of like a remix. And
Ocarina of Time 3D remake also includes the Master Quest as part of it, so there's a lot of added value in there. I don't know if we consider that like part of Ocarina of Time? Yes, no, we don't know. We're kind of shaking our head.
But so I guess for me, I'm ranking my experiences with these games holistically.
Okay.
So it's not a specific version of the game. It is, what do I think of Ocarina of Time in general?
Right. I'm also realizing right now that we don't have Zelda BS on this list. The Satellaview, basically Super Famicom version of whatever. We don't have that on here. That's a fun curiosity that we like to pick up from time to time and look at and say, look at this weird thing that came out of Japan. But it cannot be included in our list.
No, a real shame that we don't have a game on this list, though, that we've never played but will badmouth anyways, though.
You want to talk about Wand of Gamelon? The Philips CDI games? We could always do that. Okay, so now back to your original request of saying a few words about Skyward Sword. I finished it maybe about a month ago at this point, maybe even a little more, before Christmas. And I really enjoyed it, especially like the sort of final battle sequence. But just like throughout the way that Link's relationship with the characters and with Skyloft sort of like grew and changed. It's sort of the most dynamic he is as a character, I think, throughout any of these games. Really the only one where like he is a character instead of just like things happening around him. But yeah, I like the game a lot. I found the combat to be really engaging, and the exploration to be like fun. Like are the dungeons a little bit more like linear and a little bit more like looping back around in like prescribed sort of loops? Yeah, kind of, but like I don't know, that kind of thing doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I didn't mind how linear the dungeons were. In fact, sometimes I found it to be like a virtue,
a little bit of a relief, right,
of the game. I really, really enjoy Skyloft. I really like the world of Skyward Sword. I really like the characters. I like the art design. I think it's really interesting to see the roots of Breath of the Wild in a game that is, in a lot of respects, very different from Breath of the Wild, but
yes,
in some respects not that different. I like all the different like races that exist in this version of Hyrule and how they are unique.
It seems like one of the like sort of like shots of creativity, right, where we do eventually get I guess we get Gorons kind of early, but like our first exposure to like the Elden volcano area is those like mole people, right? And like same thing in like the Kokiri forest. Like we don't meet little elf people or even like Dekus. We meet these, what are they called?
They're like Kiwis or something like that.
Yeah, they're like Kiwi or something like that. These weird little guys that don't show up in any other Zelda games.
Yeah. I feel like the kind of downside to this game for me is I'm actually enjoying playing with motion controls.
Yes.
But it is definitely like I'm just waggling my way through it. I'm not
And
really
again,
taking
I don't know how you're doing that.
It's not that hard. It's really not. Like there are a few bosses that require like specific motions.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I'm completely just waggling my way through this game. The other thing is that as much as I enjoy the world, flying around like sky in the sky,
yeah.
sometimes gets tedious because it's pretty far from one area to the other with like nothing really to do. Plus, I think that after a while, like when you get to the end game, the world begins to feel pretty small, and you're like really just looping back on these 4 different areas.
Yeah,
all the time.
One of them being the sky, and then like the 3 areas on the ground. Yeah, well, and I do like the way that revisiting the areas reveals like radical transformations to them. Like when the forest is flooded in Skyward Sword, I thought that was the coolest thing, that you're like swimming around parts of the forest that like you were completely inaccessible before.
That was cool. I hated having to gather all of the notes.
Sure, that's not fun.
But I agree. That was neat to see the transformation of the area. I don't know. To me, it just feels like a little repetitive, like when... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm blanking on the name, but there's in outside of the sacred like realm, outside of the sacred grounds or whatever it's called, that temple, and there's the big monster, that silver monster that like comes out and you have to like break its toes for it to fall over.
You got to smash its toes so many times.
You like that you have that same encounter like 3 or 4 times in the game, and you're just like, why am I doing this again?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are actually a lot of times that Skyward Sword is making you do something again. And, you know, it's kind of like making you ask the question, like, why this again? Or why is this taking longer? I think probably all Zelda games are guilty of this to some degree. But there is like a real stretch towards the end of Skyward Sword that is like, I can't believe this is still happening. Like, I can't believe there's like one more thing I have to do, or like one more song I have to unlock, or like, okay, now I'm only getting like a piece of the song.
And are you talking about the part where you have to go to the 3 different dragons and to learn the 3?
Yes.
Like, so I didn't mind that. I didn't mind it. Or actually, I guess what I should say is that I thought the end...
You didn't like collecting those notes?
I thought the end result, when like the 4 dragons come together and you learn the song and you can finally open that final like temple or that final dungeon on Skyloft, I thought that was like cool. Like, I love the music in this game. I like the art design in this game a lot. The character design, I thought that moment was really neat. But I 100% agree that like the different tasks you have to do in order to complete that song are so tedious. The final one is having to go into like the silent realm for the final time on Skyloft.
Yes.
And just those are not fun. They're essentially the tier collecting game in Twilight Princess that everybody hated, but
worse, because
worse.
Like, so the difference, because they are very similar in that it like takes an area that you've been in already and it changes your skill set and like what you can actually do in there. And in Twilight Princess, it just makes you the Wolf Link the whole time, which is its own, you know, thing, but like there's still combat. The game is still basically the game. Whereas in Skyward Sword, when you go into the Quiet Realm, is that what it's called?
I think it's the Silent Realm.
Where you literally can't do anything. All you can do is run around and like climb and just try and get from like one safe area to the next while you're collecting these things and hopefully not get spotted. Like, it takes all of the combat. It even takes sort of like exploration out of it, because it's a space you've already explored. You just have to like do it again because the special things are in different places.
Yeah, it's those I found to
they're a little baffling.
I found them to be very tedious. I think another thing, maybe because of my first experience with this game, is one on the HD remake where they made some quality of life changes, and 2, I've been playing this game spaced out for so long, is that Fee, the like sword helper character,
totally
doesn't really bother me.
No, in fact, kind of great. And I loved the sort of resolution towards the end of the game where and this may be a spoiler for Skyward Sword, so forgive me or skip ahead. I'll keep it under 30 seconds. The villain that you're fighting, Girahim, ends up being like the fee for the demon king that you're fighting at the end. He becomes its sword. So like there's a neat little like parallel of like the thing that's been annoying you, if it is annoying you, the parallel to it is like the enemy that's been chasing you the whole time.
Yeah. That's cool. I think there's also, you run into some limitations with this game, and I know we have to talk about a ton of other Zelda games.
Well, we'll see. We only have to talk about 9 other Zelda games.
But the other thing that you really run up to the limitations of like the Wii hardware, even in the HD remake. I think the game looks really good in HD, but there are moments just like in the animations or that sort of thing where it is not as, it falls a little short in how beautiful it is. Like when Fee sings a lot in the game, and when she does, the animation is scary. Like it's frightening. Like it is not. It doesn't really match the music, which is beautiful. The music in Skyward Sword is so good.
Yeah.
And the relationship, just got it. The relationship between Zelda and Link in Skyward Sword is, I think, my favorite in all of these games. It feels like they have a real friendship and connection. But yeah, like those areas in the presentation, sometimes like the animation, the like, I was gonna say MIDI, but that's not right. The synth music, like it kind of runs up. It's hitting that upper barrier of what the Wii can do.
Yeah,
but it's not enough to make me dislike the game.
Yeah, that's. I want to just loop back quickly to what you said about the Link Zelda relationship being like the strongest it's ever been. I think this is also where the like just supporting cast is about as strong as it ever is.
Totally.
In a Zelda game. Like there are sort of, I get a lot of hints of the Twilight Princess cast in here, except I'm not repulsed by the characters. Like I love how deep and weird the world of Twilight Princess is. But like that little like baby character Mallow, who opens like their own shop, and like all the rest of the kids from Farron Wood are weird looking and they act weird. And like everyone in Skyward Sword has, and maybe they're tropes or whatever, but like very simple character types that then like get developed in interesting ways. Like Groose being like the bully who ends up like finding a role in this greater like mythical quest that you're playing out, but finding his role that is different from yours and is not like the glory hound role that like he would so totally want to steal from you, but ends up finding like he finds fulfillment in a different way. It's so like interesting and cool, and like you just don't think about that in terms of other Zelda games.
Yeah, absolutely. So really like Skyward Sword. It'll be interesting to see how these other games compare once we start talking about it. But I'm glad we're revisiting this list, if only so I can sing the praises of Skyward Sword after having actually experienced it.
We've already brought up Twilight Princess, so maybe we should try to put it relationally in the line here, either ahead of or behind Skyward Sword.
I like that.
What do you think? Is Twilight Princess a better game or a worse game than Skyward Sword? Here are some things I would say in Twilight Princess's favor, especially in its most recent release, the HD re-release on the Wii U. The combat has been like nice and simplified. All that waggle controlling that you did on the Wii version of it, gone. Just buttons now. And you can use the gamepad to just sort of like do tilt aiming or assist it in your aiming. And the combat in Twilight Princess is rad. And Midna is one of our favorite NPCs in Zelda. I like Wolf Link, but I don't know. I think this may be a game that I end up in the final assessment put below Skyward Sword.
Twilight Princess is a really strange game because it is, in a lot of ways, a remake of Ocarina of Time.
Yes.
Like it feels very much to me like a reaction to the reaction to Wind Waker.
Yes.
And so Nintendo kind of, I don't know, it feels like they listened to the reaction of the fans and was like, okay, we're gonna, do that thing that you've been wanting us to do since the end of the Nintendo 64 era. Here's
Right.
like a
You want dark? We can do dark.
yeah.
And like that's true also in like the visual stylings of the game too, that it has this like sort of brown tint to it, and you're taken to the Twilight realm, which is like all these like blacks and browns, and like the light is like it's not bright light, it's like all yellowy.
Feels very much artifact of its time because
Right.
that saturated color scheme was gaming, Space Marines.
Totally.
This was the peak of that. And but so as much as Twilight Princess is, I think, like a reflection of Ocarina of Time and a reflection of that, I think that Nintendo takes that opportunity to do some deeply, deeply, deeply weird and wild things.
And occasionally resulting in awesome stuff, right? Like this is the game that has like the gear item that you use to like skate around on these tracks and walls and stuff. This is the game where there's a dungeon inside a haunted house on the top of a mountain that's inhabited by two Yeti. Like it's so deeply weird and so cool and evocative that like I mean, I don't mean it as a diss when I say I think I may like it less than Skyward Sword, because it is still a very cool and interesting game.
Yeah, I mean the dungeons in Twilight Princess I think are
Some of the
better
best.
than
Yeah.
Skyward Sword, hands down.
Yeah.
Those boss fights that you mentioned has really like interesting boss fights. The world felt very expansive,
Mhm.
because going back and playing Ocarina of Time, you realize how small Hyrule is, and that's not. It's not like necessarily a bad thing in Ocarina of Time because there's not much to do in Hyrule Field, so it makes sense.
Sure.
You don't need to spend a lot of time in it. But here, like when they introduced being able to do combat on horseback,
Yeah.
that seemed so amazing. Hyrule seems so big for, the first time where it really was like, oh my gosh, this is the Hyrule of Ocarina of Time, but done on this enormous scale.
Right.
All of that I think was really effective in the presentation. I don't know that it makes it more fun to play. Like, I don't know that I know for sure that I don't really like horse combat all that much.
Right.
There are some filler missions in Twilight Princess that are some of my least favorite in the entire series. Like when you have to escort that wagon.
That wagon one is so. Yeah, that is not fun.
Just like not particularly fun.
And like collecting the tears, I guess, is really just the analog for the silent realm or whatever. So like those cancel each other out.
Right. I feel like Twilight Princess, the world is really large, but there's not a ton of reward for exploring it. But there are also elements that I really, really like. Like towards the end of the game, you go to the hidden village, which is kind of like this Western ghost town
so
type
cool.
thing, which is just really fun. So
feels like a Zelda 2 Adventure of Link
Yes.
reference with that hidden village as well.
Totally. So yeah, I Twilight Princess is a real mixed bag for me. I'm for the moment going to say I like it less than Skyward Sword.
Let's put it there.
Okay.
We've already drawn well, and just I just want to point out that the interesting thing that you said of Twilight Princess being like a product of its time, both in that it is sort of the color palette of video gaming writ large at the time, and also it being a reaction to the reaction to Wind Waker. That almost Twilight Princess almost feels like Nintendo at its most reactive. Wind Waker is obviously chasing something that they want to do, right? And Skyward Sword feels similar in that matter, that like they had done something with Twilight Princess that sold a bunch of copies because it was like, a launch game for the Wii. And then they were like, let's stuff all of our crazy control scheme ideas that are possible with the Wii Motion Plus into Skyward Sword.
Yeah.
And just made a game around that. They're driven by their own wants and desires there, where Twilight Princess seems more reactionary to me. And also is like you say, a sort of almost remake or redo at the Ocarina of Time formula.
Yeah.
We've talked about it. Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Let's position it either. First, let's pit it against Skyward Sword and see if we like it better or worse. Obvious parallels between the two: a huge, open, largely featureless world that you have to navigate via boat or bird. Mark, right off the bat, which do you prefer, boat or bird?
So I haven't played the HD remake of Wind Waker where they like sped up the boat,
Yeah.
made that a lot easier. So based on my experience with Wind Waker, I would say Skyward Sword.
So I say the boat, Wind Waker. Even at its, I've played both versions of the game. Even when it's slowed down, there is like a meditative, wonderful, going on an adventure quality to sailing through the great sea that was Hyrule. And that music kicks in, that do doo 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 doo, and just having this like beautiful like anime seascape ahead of you. It's so evocative and so wonderful, and nothing about the sky in Skyward Sword ever feels like the world is at your fingertips. You know what I mean?
Totally. Another thing that I feel like these two games have in common is we talked about the expressiveness of Link in Skyward Sword.
Yes.
And that is definitely true in Wind Waker as well. Having that like Toon Link style makes Link really interesting as a character because he can emote.
Yeah, suddenly he's like Mickey Mouse or something, right? Well, and also like you said that Skyward Sword is the best Zelda Link relationship, and I agree with that. With the possible exception of the relationship between Link and Tetra, when Zelda is still being Tetra, when she's still like a pirate, the leader of a pirate ship, she gets neutered pretty fast when she's revealed as Zelda, which is a little bit of a bummer. But that's one of the things about Wind Waker. Wind Waker to me feels like 75% of a perfect game.
Totally.
And 25% of the game is just straight missing. There are only 2 dungeons in like the latter half of the game when there should clearly be like 3 or 4, maybe even 5. And Zelda's like absence from the back half of the game also feels like stuff that is just straight missing. But the 75% of the game that is there is so good.
It's so good. It has one of the best Ganon deaths in the entire series.
Epic.
Not enough can be said about how amazing the art style is and the character design. Again, Ganon's character design in Wind Waker is amazing. It's just iconic.
Yeah. Oh man. And you remember how like when you're fighting in Wind Waker, and you land like successive blows against the enemy, that like it is time to music cues that are like dun 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 dun, and like the little puffs of like animated smoke that like come off of, like it's not an effect that is meant to actually look like smoke. It looks like someone is drawing smoke on there. It's just so like it's such a complete package. And again, I know it's like missing like a full quarter of itself.
Right, which is a real bummer because it really does, in Skyward Sword, we talked about what much of a drag it was to learn the 3 parts of the song so you could kind of move on to the last final part of the game. Wind Waker has this
famously.
Like really just endless oh man, I am blanking on
Triforce shards.
That's right. Yeah.
This whole quest where you have to find like maps, or you have to pay Tingle for maps to find pieces of the Triforce and put it together. It does include Tingle though.
Yes,
so, I mean,
exactly. Yeah, which Skyward Sword, no Tingle.
Right, that's right. All right. So where, Mark, where does your gut put Wind Waker in relation to these 2 games?
Can I just say one more thing about Wind Waker?
Please.
And that is that I know it is not a reflection on the game directly, but I am so happy that Toon Link exists and the world of Toon Link exists.
Yes.
Because Phantom Hourglass, I really like a lot. And again, just like the continued characterizations in Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks to a lesser degree.
I was going to say it's Spirit Tracks Erasure.
Yeah, a game that I loathe.
Right.
So I am very happy that Toon Link exists. For me, would put it directly between the 2. I think I like it less. Well, I think I like it more than Twilight Princess. I am not sure how I feel about Skyward Sword.
So I think I want to put Wind Waker above Skyward Sword. partially because the magic of the Great Sea and traversing it on the King of Red Dragons is so I like it, it is a quality that I don't think Zelda games uh are able to display again until Breath of the Wild, where like it truly does feel like there is a world in front of you. When you're flying around in the sky, it is like so obviously a like world map select screen where you're deciding like where to go next. Um, and Wind Waker, whether it's illusion or what, it feels like you're already on the adventure.
That's such a good point, and that is something that Skyward Sword does not do well. There's no feeling of this interconnected world. It is very much like you are going to this box, and then you are going to leave this box to go to another box.
Yes.
And never the two will meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. So we're putting Wind Waker above Skyward Sword. So you mentioned the music in Skyward Sword being very strong. I think the music in Wind Waker even better.
Oh, that is one area where I wish that I had played the HD remake to
just hear those samples crisped up a little bit.
Exactly, yeah.
All right. Now, Mark, where would you like to go?
How about we jump back in time a little bit?
Whoa!
We've been doing a lot of 3D Zeldas.
Sure.
But let's pick up some of the 2D Zeldas. So before the Ocarina of Time changeover, do you want to start with Zelda 2?
Oh, okay. The Zelda 2, a game that is near and dear to my heart, a game that I beat before I ever beat the original Legend of Zelda, and also a game that I played like when it was new. You know what I mean? Like I was a kid playing the Adventure of Link very, very early. It's a game that I like a lot, but there's no way it's better than Twilight Princess.
Right, I totally agree. Link's...
It's also such a weird one.
It's a very weird game. I think we played it for, if I'm remembering right, we played it together for Weird Sequels Month.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Because it is a very weird sequel that plays nothing like the original Legend of Zelda. It's like there's a big open world, or like a big world map that you're walking around to go from town to town, dungeon to dungeon. When you get out of the world map, suddenly it's like 2D side scrolling.
Well, like you can either by like going into a temple, a village, or a cave, you can go into these like side scrolling levels, or when you're walking around the world map, like enemies just appear, and if they touch you, then you get like transported into like a small combat encounter, which is a side scrolling like 2D combat focused little vignette.
Yeah, it does some really interesting things. It's the most like explicitly an RPG.
Yep.
Of any of the
you level up
Zelda games. You level up, you choose which
spells.
Of your abilities you're going to like put more energy into. It's really it's a pretty dark game in the sense that the fail state is Ganon's followers,
right.
like using your blood to restore Ganon to life. I think it's just kind of like mystifying in the here and now. I did not have any love for this game previously. I remember playing it with you was a really enjoyable experience because some of the things were really confounding to me. You had played this game so much that it wasn't like a barrier. It's like, oh, I know exactly what to do, or I know how to cheese this specific part of the game.
Yeah,
because I've done it a million times as a kid.
Right. Well, and in particular, there is the Death Mountain sequence, which is maybe the third temple in the game, or like after the second temple, is a legitimately terrifying maze that you are woefully underpowered to explore and like battle the enemies in there. And I learned the like only way through it when I was a kid. And if I were to be approaching that like cold as an adult, I would be like, absolutely not. I need to walk through.
And I think that was our final kind of like word on the game when we played it together, is that, hey, if you have a guide, this is pretty enjoyable.
Yeah.
But we also said that about Castlevania 2. Games that are pretty similar. In Legend of Zelda, Adventure of Link, the villagers give you like really cryptic hints.
Yeah.
That, again, if you don't have a guide, I don't know how you're ever supposed to figure out what they mean. In Castlevania 2, they just lie to you. They just tell you false information.
But they also do that cryptically as well. I do think it is possible to play The Adventure of Link without a guide. I don't think it is possible to play Castlevania 2 without a guide at this point.
No.
But okay, so regardless, we're putting The Adventure of Link below Twilight Princess.
Yes.
Well, we're on the NES. Let's stay on the NES and bring in the original Legend of Zelda.
Heavy hitter.
A heavy hitter, and also a game that every time I go back to it, and I feel like I have occasion to go back to Legend of Zelda frequently. Every time I go back to it, I feel like I am playing it differently. I'm approaching things in different order. I'm prioritizing different things. There are sometimes when I make a beeline for the upgraded sword. I can never find the third dungeon, and so I'm like 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and I'm like, where is 3? And it's a good game with a lot of depth. And most recently I've been playing it on the Legend of Zelda 35th anniversary Game & Watch in the Japanese version, so I can't read what anyone is saying to me, but I'm getting some cool weird sound effects that I had not heard before.
The original Legend of Zelda does not bring me much joy to play.
Oh no.
I appreciate its place in history.
Yes.
I totally understand and appreciate why people enjoy playing it. I don't like playing the original Legend of Zelda. I do not find it fun.
All right. Where then would you put it on our current list?
I would put
better
it
than Adventure of Link?
Definitely better than Adventure of Link. For as obtuse as the original Legend of Zelda, I think, can be, it is definitely not as bad as Adventure of Link.
Well, there's no point in the original Legend of Zelda where you have to understand what a NPC is saying to you. There are times in Adventure of Link where you have to understand what they're saying to you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where I would put it.
Okay, so The Legend of Zelda is going on the list above The Adventure of Link, but below Twilight Princess?
For me, absolutely. But I am interested, you have had occasion to play, you're playing Legend of Zelda more recently because you have the 35th anniversary Game & Watch.
Yeah.
How would you compare it to Twilight Princess?
I like Twilight Princess better. There's... for as much as I like the original Legend of Zelda, you do have to do a lot of the work on your own, both in terms of figuring out what to do next, but also in terms of like telling yourself the story. Twilight Princess is a more complete package. And I'll, not to say that a 8-bit game is never going to be able to compete with a fully 3D whatever. But I just think Twilight Princess does more and does it better. The combat's more interesting. The music's better. Kind of just everything across the board. All right. Let's go to...
I'm kind of hankering to talk about Majora's Mask.
Let's do it. The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask on the Nintendo 64.
So I think that in the past, have valued Majora's Mask a lot because of how different it is from the other Zelda games.
Yes.
But I think maybe I overvalued that strangeness.
Mm-hmm.
To the point that I don't think that I would put it as high as I did last time.
Last time it came in number 3 on our list, which as I was reading it out, I sort of couldn't believe that we had it so high. Majora's Mask is a game that I never completed. I didn't have a copy of it on the Nintendo 64, and I have played a bunch of it on the 3DS, a 3DS remake, which, Mark, as you mentioned earlier in the show, changes a bunch of things, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, sometimes just to make things different. And I found the fundamental loop of this game frustrating in that I would do good things, I would fix problems, and then have to turn back time. Those problems would still persist on my successive playthroughs, which I understand is thematically what the game is about, right? It's about how you do the best you can, and it doesn't matter. These people are still doomed in a lot of ways. that feels like a bummer to me.
Right.
I kind of want to be a hero is one of my complaints about playing Spider-Man on PS4 is that like as I progress through the game and like clear out bad guy camps, because the story is progressing, there are more bad guys in Manhattan than there were before. So the stage is getting worse and worse the longer I'm fighting. And I feel like Majora's Mask is the same kind of thing where you're just on this treadmill of misery.
Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe just like the kind of where the state of the world at the moment that is a kind of depressing mechanic to have to continue to play through. I also think that the my feelings on Majora's Mask now are that it is kind of like the Zelda equivalent of Super Mario Brothers 2 in Japan, where it is taking this beloved game that, you know, blew the world away, like Ocarina of Time, and is saying, okay, like, this game is for people who mastered Ocarina of Time, and now we're just going to, like, go crazy with those mechanics. And I feel like it is, if Majora's Mask is your entry point to Zelda, that is a difficult entry point, because I think it's not obtuse, but it is a purposefully like frustrating game with like frustrating mechanics.
Yeah. Well, and if that is truly your entry point into Zelda, you're not going to find an experience like that anywhere else in the series, right? Now, I don't want to be too negative about it though, because there are things about Majora's Mask that I do think speak to both of our like current just like preferences in gaming, right? Like the sort of emphasis on like the relationships between the characters, of doing things for other people, of living in a like breathing world that changes and then changes back because you got to go back in time. But like there are so many elements in Majora's Mask that feel like they're precursors to like Animal Crossing.
Totally.
Right? That like you're fulfilling requests, you're living in that world.
There has also never been a game like Majora's Mask.
Yes.
Majora's Mask is wholly unique. There's never been a Zelda game like it. Like, you know, it is its own thing, and whether you love it or hate it, there are still elements of it that have been gifted to the Zelda series from Majora's Mask, like Tingle.
Like Tingle.
Yeah, Majora's Mask is the first appearance of Tingle. And man, I can't hate the game.
No, not when it has Tingle in it. It's also every now and then there needs to be like I mentioned it in Skyward Sword that there's just like this injection of like new energy or like new mythology, and Majora's Mask absolutely does that. It takes this like the Skull Kid was an interesting sort of concept that's touched on in Ocarina of Time, and that's sort of blown out in Majora's Mask. This poor character beset by what is essentially the One Ring forged by Saruman in the Fires of Mount Doom, but in mask form. But then just also like the weird little characters that you meet along the way. It has a lot there in common with Link's Awakening, which we'll talk about in a little bit, of just being aggressively weird.
Yeah.
And that allows future Zelda games to draw on that same weirdness and find those specifics to like put into other worlds.
Also, the rare Zelda game, no Ganon.
No Ganon.
But I do like even though the story is about the apocalypse and the end of the world, it's a much smaller scale Zelda game.
Yeah.
It feels maybe most like Link's Awakening that way, where like the stakes are they feel more personal.
Yeah. How, if you were going to play Majora's Mask right now, if we were to say we're going to do it for the show, how would you play it?
So
bearing in mind you could wait and play it on the Switch when it comes there.
Yeah, I know that not everybody agrees, but for me, I still think the 3DS version is probably the best way to experience Majora's Mask, even with like the changes to the bosses, the changes to like the Zora swimming, like all that kind of stuff. And
the Deku jumping, that like skipping across the water, that is also kind of messed up.
That's right, but for me, I still enjoyed the 3DS version of Majora's Mask, and that's the one I would recommend to most people.
I wish they would do like a definitive version of it that takes all of the improvements and undoes some of the deprovements, and just looks nice on Switch. I know that there are all kinds of games that we would like to see either remade or just ported over to Switch. But man, a Majora's Mask remake would be pretty cool.
So what do you think, Patrick? Where are we slotting it in our definitive ranking?
I want to put it below Twilight Princess and above The Legend of Zelda.
That seems right to me. I feel good about that.
All right. Mark, we've talked about it a couple times. Let's bring Link's Awakening into the equation here. Link's Awakening, first time it's appearing on this list in any form, was a game originally released for the Game Boy, re-released for the Game Boy Color as Link's Awakening DX, and then again re-released just as Link's Awakening on the Switch in 2019 with all new graphics, but otherwise sort of unchanged.
Yeah, I feel like the other big improvement is because the Switch controller has so many more buttons.
Yes.
You didn't have to continually go into the menu to switch items out like you do all the time if you're playing on the Game Boy or Game Boy Color.
And a designated sword and shield button, like that's
unthinkable.
It's amazing that, I mean, obviously you couldn't do it on Game Boy. It just had two buttons. Like, what are you gonna do? And there's also the what were they called? Like pocket dungeons, or the sort of like build your own dungeon mini game that was part of Link's Awakening, is also included in there.
So Link's Awakening for me, this is another one where I'm basing most of my, I've played I think all three versions, but basing most of my impressions on the Switch version of Link's Awakening.
Which I sort of feel now is like like that's the game.
Yeah, if you're gonna play it, the games are so similar. Like it is the same grid, it is all that stuff. It really is just like graphics and some slight changes here and there
and quality of life too. Like there's one of the things that is that makes the original Link's Awakening super obnoxious is every time you pick up a acorn or a piece of what is it, acorn of courage or like a piece of power, there is a little text box that appears explaining the thing to you. That still happens in the remake, but it all fits in one text box in the remake, and you can just like quickly press A to get through it. And in the original Game Boy, you got to really advance that text, see a second thing. Like it's a matter of, does it take you half a second or 3 seconds? And it's amazing how much that improves the game.
Yeah, oh yeah, totally. I mean, I think Link's Awakening, the virtues of Link's Awakening are the same virtues as Majora's Mask for me. It's like, it's the world, it's the characters, it's the quirky dialogue, the relationship between everybody, like the inventiveness of that, the way that they, kind of sneak in other Nintendo characters. Kirby's an enemy. There are Goombas. You have these side-scrolling parts that are very different from Adventure of Link, but still kind of pay homage to it. So,
well, hold on. There's some other elements worth shouting out here before we get into the negatives, because the negatives are also like a pretty ferocious thing to deal with. The graphics and music in the Link's Awakening remake on Switch are superb. The game looks amazing, and the music arrangements, my God, are so good and clear and have this like quirky feeling of a small ensemble of instruments working together to play these like classic Zelda songs in a way and with a texture that you've never heard before.
Yeah, the presentation of Link's Awakening on Switch is unimpeachable.
Yeah.
I think it has terrible, especially as the game goes on.
Yes.
The dungeons are just tedious and endless and not fun at all.
And the dungeons also feel like were like designed by another team, right? That they don't really have a clear relationship to where they take place in the story, where they are on the world map. They're all just like, here's this dungeon, it's here. Which I mean, I guess you could also say of like the original Legend of Zelda or whatever. But like it's such a far cry from like, uh, when you are going into the dungeons in any of the rest of these games, right? That all feel like they are part of those worlds. Um, so it's a tough criticism to level against Link's Awakening because the rest of the game is so good.
Yeah, I feel like the personality of the game lets it get away with a lot, but
Yeah.
actually playing it, I think is especially towards the end a bit of a slog, and that really brings it down on this list for me.
Um, Link's Awakening is, I believe, the only one of these games that I've ever 100%ed. So it's my favorite. I put it right at the top.
It is really interesting that Link's Awakening, because it's a Game Boy game, the world is fairly small
Yeah.
and contained, but it does feel like there is rewards for experimentation.
Yeah.
Like you go into a shop and you can steal an item, but then when you come back, you're labeled a thief, and he's gonna shock you with an
And then
electric
everyone
ray.
calls you thief for the rest of the game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, but you can do that. Like
Yeah.
they allowed you to do it, and I feel like that is something that we didn't see in Zelda games for a long time into the future. Um,
Mark, where would you put this game in our lineup?
I think I'd put it below Majora's Mask and below above Legend of Zelda.
So this is where I think we do have differing opinion, as I think I put it above Majora's Mask, but again, I've never really been able to get over the sort of existential hurdle of the premise of Majora's Mask.
Well, and maybe that's enough to put it above Majora's Mask because even though like Link's Awakening is dealing with some grim stuff,
yeah,
the whole world is a dream.
Yep.
By completing the game, you are destroying the world that you've come to save and come to love.
right.
And
A world which has been beset by nightmares, which will also disappear when you wake the windfish. But yes,
so so even though it is still dealing with kind of like that heavier idea, the game itself is so joyful in a way that Majora's Mask is not. That I don't hate putting it above Majora's Mask
and below Twilight Princess.
Yeah, I think so. I think the core mechanics of Link's Awakening are not as good or satisfying as Twilight Princess.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there's also just like more of Twilight Princess to enjoy. The reason that I have 100% of Link's Awakening is that you can do that in about 10 hours, right? Twilight Princess, you still have 4 dungeons to go at that point. Okay, so just to review our list at the moment, from the bottom, it goes Zelda 2, The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask, Link's Awakening, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and Wind Waker topping off the list. But of course, we have 3 possible best game of all time contenders. Link to the Past, Ocarina of Time, and Breath of the Wild still to slot in here. Mark, how you feeling?
Let's go to Breath of the Wild, our number 1 from our original ranking. Having a little bit more time to sit with the game since it was released in 2017. I'm curious, Patrick, what your feelings are on it now.
I feel like my feelings of Breath of the Wild have only improved with the game's age. We got 2 sets of DLC that came out after we ranked it as the best Zelda game, which don't do a ton to like change the game really. But the Champion's Ballad is an effective and affecting like bit of DLC. The thing where you go into the Lost Woods and put the sword back in and then have like that challenge is super cool. The game only
Trial of
the
sword, maybe
it's Trial of Mark. I think you did it. Yeah, I don't know. I think the fact that people are still discovering stuff about the game, and like that coupled with my original memories of exploring Hyrule, and there being like no other gaming experience like that. We've had 5 years of open world games after Breath of the Wild that have uh, done their own version of exploring a big open world like that. And I just don't think there's a better world than Breath of the Wild's Hyrule.
Yeah, I talked about how Legend of Zelda, like playing Legend of Zelda doesn't bring me a lot of joy, but playing Breath of the Wild brings me so much joy because there are so many elements of this game that I think are, it's not a perfect game, but it is maybe my most fond gaming memory, or definitely up there, because there was something like that was so magical about when the game came out. Everybody was playing it. The possibilities seemed endless. Talking to people, they'd be like, well, did you try this? Did you know that you could do this? Did you know that this existed? They'd be like, what? No. They're like, that's amazing. Everybody kind of experiencing the game on their own time, in their own way. um I it it's something that, as much as I'm looking forward to the sequel to Breath of the Wild, I'm also dreading it,
I know, me
because
too.
I just don't know how anything can live up to the experience of experiencing Breath of the Wild for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's something so, the game is so confident in what it is, right? It gives you the like 4 puzzle solving tools that you're going to use the rest of the game within the first like hour and a half. And then you are just like let loose on the world. The fact that it has like the weapon degradation and weapons that break being a thing that like people say they don't like, and I guess like everyone's entitled to their opinion, but for my money, it's like a fundamental part of how the game works. The fact that like you have to change your clothes to look weird different ways so that you can survive in different environments, and there's no, like, I know transmogging is a thing that's important in a lot of like other games, so you can continue to look the way you always want to look but have the stats of whatever. And the fact that Breath of the Wild is like, no, if you're going to be warm in this environment, you have to wear what the Rito people are wearing. Just feels so self-assured, that the game is what it is and the world is like unimpeachable.
Yeah, and the kind of just celebration of Zelda history that
Yep.
occurs in Breath of the Wild, with the winks and nods to other games, other locations. I remember the first time I stumbled on a labyrinth.
Yeah.
The one I did was in like the upper right hand corner of the map.
Yeah,
That was
that
like
island.
yes,
Yeah.
that was the first one I encountered, and it just felt like transgressive. And
Yes.
then as you're beginning to do the individual beasts, the individual, what are they called?
Yeah, the divine
The
beasts.
divine beasts, yeah. And you're getting the other tools. And so, oh, the next time I stumbled on one of these labyrinths, I had Rivali's Gale, and I could just jump to the top and like scurry around up
Yeah.
there. Like the way that the tools that they give to you are like just change the way that you play and approach the game, and that you can find your own play styles. I don't
Yeah.
know. I do think for me, one of the things with Breath of the Wild is that once I had opened up every part of Hyrule, the game was still fun, but I lost some of what I loved so much about Breath of the Wild, which really was that sense of discovery, where it was like, oh, like I see that thing way, way over there.
Yeah.
How am I going to get to it? Am I strong enough? Do I have the right equipment? Um, yeah, I really, really love Breath of the Wild, and just like I said, I'm so looking forward to the sequel, but I just don't think there's any way that it can live up to that experience.
So I think we are both in agreement that Breath of the Wild goes at number one, at least for the time being. We have yet to compete it against 2 other possible best game of all time candidates, Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. Mark, let's do Ocarina because I feel like Link to the Past has the best chance of dethroning Breath of the Wild. Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time.
So when we did our last ranking, I had not played the 3DS remake of
Whoa.
Ocarina of Time,
Whoa.
because I'm pretty sure we did the ranking the Ocarina of Time dungeons after that, and that's what I played
Yes.
the
Yeah,
3DS
that's right.
remake for. And so, I think my esteem for Ocarina of Time has grown a little bit, and in that I think I would rank it over Twilight Princess, but below Skyward Sword.
Okay. All right. What I mean, is there anything that we have to say about Ocarina of Time, just sort of like abstractly? It's weird because in talking about like all of the 3D Zeldas, we sort of have to keep referring back to Ocarina of Time. It's so like foundational in that way, um, that like it just sort of is the template. One of the things that I always worry about with Ocarina of Time is like, does it actually age as well as the people who played it when it came out think it does? It's a little bit the like Mario 64 syndrome, which is aged perfectly. Just don't try to control the camera. The game will play better if you don't wrestle with the camera. Um, but I did play it when it came out originally. I love it. Uh, love riding around Hyrule Field on that horse. I love the story. I love the two worlds element of it, where you're growing up and the world becomes crap and then you save it. Is just so wonderful. I think I agree with you. I think it's better than Twilight Princess.
Yeah, now that we're saying that,
I almost feel like maybe it's not. Maybe it is one step below Twilight Princess.
because I think you might be right that if you are coming to Ocarina of Time, even the 3DS remake for the first time, okay, I think maybe the best way that I can explain my feelings on Ocarina of Time are by talking about the horror film Halloween.
Okay.
So I saw Halloween for the first time in my 20s. And when I think the original Halloween is a really, really, really great movie.
Yes.
And it holds up extremely well. But when you're watching it, I had seen so many other movies that ripped off or, like elaborated on what the original Halloween did, that
Yes.
nothing in Halloween surprised me. Right? Like
Mhm.
it was like you're like, wow, this is like really you can tell that this is made by a really good filmmaker. There are very few horror movies like slasher films that are made like this.
Yeah.
And so I totally see why it was ripped off or why elements of this were taken for other movies. And I think I feel that way about Ocarina of Time now, where what was so great about Ocarina of Time has been done very well and sometimes better in other games. You respect Ocarina of Time. It is still an amazing game that holds up extremely well for a Nintendo 64 game.
Yes.
But I think, like Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, Wind Waker, Breath of the Wild, they have all taken elements of Ocarina of Time and improved it. And so
It's tough. I mean, there. I think I really, really want to figure out whether we think Twilight Princess or Ocarina of Time are better games, because like there are.
they're so similar
They're
too. Like
so
structurally,
similar.
they're
Yes.
very similar.
But like, I don't know. Are there moments in Twilight Princess that hit the same like emotional weight as pulling the Master Sword out and being catapulted 7 years into the future? Right? There isn't a thing like that. Is there a set piece like the Forest Temple? Right? Is there a moment like rescuing Epona from the evil Ingo's ranch who's taken? Like there are just so many like little things that stick in my mind and in my heart so much that I just want to make sure we're not underselling Ocarina of Time.
I think also something to consider is we talked when we were about Twilight Princess how because they were using so much of the template of Ocarina of Time, they were able to do really different and surprising things. And I think I definitely think that that's true, but I think there's something to be said for the fundamentals of Ocarina of Time that are done so well, but still has room for like you were saying, like those different kind of surprises, right? It wasn't a surprise because the character design was crazy or this NPC was
Right.
acting insane. It was surprising because we had never experienced a game like it before.
Yeah. So like we have to give it its trailblazer dues. The ocarina itself being like a piece of that equation, that has then like been replicated in a lot of different games in one form or another. Wolf Link's Howl, the actual Wind Waker itself, just being such like a foundational thing of Zelda going forward.
Well, I wonder if since we're doing this, I wonder if we are overvaluing Skyward Sword because we played it so recently,
Possibly.
and that Ocarina of Time really should be above Skyward Sword and below Wind Waker because, like, we talked about the world of Ocarina of Time being kind of like small and empty, but it's not like Skyward Sword's world is huge and
No.
expansive with like tons to explore.
Right. Well, and like this was sort of where I was driving, that like not only should Ocarina of Time be above Twilight Princess, I think it should be above Skyward Sword as well.
I think you're right. I do think you're right.
Which is not to say that we're holding Skyward Sword in like lower esteem or whatever, but like that's just what it is. Okay, so Skyward Sword is going
Well, I just want to real quick,
yes.
before we finalize this, I agree it's above Skyward Sword. What about Wind Waker? Like, what do we like about Wind Waker that is more enjoyable that would put it above Ocarina of Time?
The sea. For me, that's enough. But I think also the characters in Wind Waker, the sense of style, which is so. It's clear to me that what Ocarina of Time is trying to do is present you with a cartoon adventure, and Wind Waker achieves it, especially in the HD remakes. I just think it's a more fun and like fully realized version of a world that Link can adventure in.
So that leaves us with a game that we have on multiple occasions called A Perfect Game,
Yes.
and that is A Link to the Past.
Legend of Zelda Link to the Past on the Super NES. Never been remade. Occasionally re-released in like Virtual Console or as part of Super NES Switch Online.
Another game that is really like foundational, really sets the template for
Totally.
what Zelda will be looking back on forever, where okay, you go gather these stones, and then the first time I played it I was like, oh, okay, like that was short but enjoyable, and you're like, oh no, there's a whole nother version of this world that you have yet to explore. There's so much more to this experience. Hyrule,
and it introducing the idea of here's this world, you will have to explore it twice. There is a light world and a dark world. That's a concept that gets revisited again and again and again throughout the series, and Link to the Past started it.
There are so many little vignettes in Link to the Past between Link and the NPCs that he encounters that I think are really fun, and like the boy in the woods, and touching and like beautiful, and just really in ways that where Link to the Past is kind of hitting above its weight.
Totally. Well, and also like introducing this idea of the weirdos that inhabit Hyrule, right? Like we give a lot of credit to Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask for they're ranked pretty low on the list, but we give them a lot of credit for like insisting on the weirdness of the people. But they were doing that in Link to the Past too. Like I think about those lumberjack brothers, or the dwarves who are the blacksmiths, or that guy in the village that just keeps running away from you. The game is so weird, and the people that inhabit that world are so rich and strange, that like you're right. It boxes above its weight in that regard. Totally.
It also has such a cool and moody opening. So atmospheric, where you're waking in the middle of the night, it's raining outside. Cool. You go deep into the dungeon, the basement of Hyrule Castle. It feels like it's like the little beginning of a James Bond film, where we're just gonna take you on this like little adventure. Like it's such a great opening for that game. Really sells you on the scope, especially for like a Super Nintendo title. It's just Link to the Past is just so much fun.
There's also, I mean, you mentioned the opening of the game, but the end of the game is also an all-time, like, as you are rolling the like, or like seeing the actual like end thing, like cinematic, it's cinematic, whatever, play out. There's this piece of music that is just, I don't know, it's sublime. Can I play a little bit of it?
Yeah,
now?
please.
Here we go. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit, so forgive me here. I don't know, man. It, like, to me, doesn't get much better than this sort of, like, Super NES sound chip Regal march.
I mean, the theme from Link to the Past in our ranking of the greatest Nintendo music of all time with friend of the show and somebody I'm not scared of at all, Greg
Not
Smith,
at all scared of Greg Smith.
We determined that the overworld theme from A Link to the Past is the greatest piece of Nintendo music of all time. I mean, all of the elements of this game are pretty much perfect for what it is.
Yeah.
You can knock it for being a 2D game. You can knock it for, having
being
simple graphics.
30 years old.
Right, yeah. But I don't know. A Link to the Past is pretty... it truly holds up. And I actually think that A Link to the Past its esteem has only grown with age with the rise of indie games. Because so many, for so many years before indie games kind of exploded onto the scene and became such a force, A Link to the Past was in that period, before it became, where it was just old, right? Of course it was a classic, but there weren't games like Link to the Past. Now there are so many games by indie developers who loved Link to the Past growing up, and so they make their own version of Link to the Past. So I feel like it's more accessible now than ever because pixel graphics and that kind of 2D adventure is so pervasive in a positive way, where it's it just feels like a part of gaming instead of feeling like the legacy of gaming.
It's one of those classic games that isn't diminished by the games that take after it. Super Metroid, one of my favorite games of all time, but it can be hard to hold that game up to other Metroidvanias that have come out since that have been inspired by it, just because there are parts of Super Metroid that do kind of sag under its own weight. But I don't think that's true of Link to the Past. I think you can hold it against other games that are built in its likeness, and Link to the Past is the stronger game.
I think also where, Ocarina of Time, you can look at it and say the limitations of the Nintendo 64, right? The graphics, the kind of stilted animations, the smallness of the world, all of that, kind of a knock against it. With Link to the Past, I feel like that 2D style is such a blessing to that game.
Yeah.
Because it's timeless in a way that Ocarina of Time, even with the 3D remake, is just not.
Yeah, it looks and sounds the way it is supposed to look and sound. A perfect game.
It is a perfect game, but is it the top of our list?
Let's go one by one and see if we think Link to the Past is better than each of the games on this list. Is Link to the Past better than Zelda 2? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it better than The Legend of Zelda?
Yes.
Yes. Is it better than Majora's Mask?
Yes.
Link's Awakening?
Yes.
Twilight Princess?
Yes.
Skyward Sword? Yes.
Yes.
Ocarina of Time? I think it is.
I think it is, yeah.
Better than Wind Waker?
I think so.
I think so. Is Link to the Past better than Breath of the Wild?
This is really hard because they are such different experiences with completely different goals.
Yes. And coming from I under the 30 years that separate them, you could apply that to any other medium and be like, oh yeah, so they came from different eras of whatever. These are from different planets, right? Different solar systems. I think A Link to the Past is the number one.
One thing that I love about this list and looking at all of these games is how different Zelda games can be.
Yeah.
And yet they still do feel like they all kind of belong together.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you. And maybe it's this music. Maybe it's its triumphant anthem. It feels like A Link to the Past ascending to its rightful place on the throne. But I think today, I'm going to say A Link to the Past is the best Zelda game.
All right. So the list is as follows. Well, I guess we basically just did this, but the bottom of the list coming in at number 10 is Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link.
Coming in at number 9 is the original Legend of Zelda.
Number 8 is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
Number 7 is Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening.
Number 6 is Legend of Zelda The Twilight Princess.
Number 5 is Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword.
Number 4 is Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time.
Number 3 is Legend of Zelda Wind Waker.
Number 2 is Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
And number 1, our definitive pick for the best Zelda game of all time, is The Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past.
Mark, this is the new definitive ranking. Let's close this out. And that is going to do it for this episode of Nintendo Cartridge Society. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, please rate, review, and follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the episode, you can share it on Facebook or Twitter. And if you want to argue with us about the list, that's fine. It's definitive. You can hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Patrick_Ellers. Mark is at MKE Mitchell, and the show is at Nin Cart Society. There's also a Facebook page, which is just Nintendo Cartridge Society. Olivia Duncan made our logo. Our theme music is provided by 8-Bit Betty. You can get more of his music by going to 8bitbetty.com or by listening right now. For my co-host, Mark Mitchell, this is Patrick Eller saying thank you for listening.
I'm Brian Husky. I'm bald.
And I'm Charlie Sanders, and I'm also bald. And we host Bald Talk on the Campfire Media Network.
Bald Talk is the podcast where two bald comedians talk to anyone bald about being bald.
But this show isn't just for baldies, Brian. Harrows will love it too.
Bald Talk gets into vulnerability, vanity, insecurity, and self-acceptance, reminding us that we all have our respective bald spots. Not that bald spots are a bad thing.
No way. I mean, my entire head is one big bald spot.
It is one huge, beautiful bald spot, Charlie.
Get Bald Talk on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, I have like a little bit of hair, but not like you. Like, you're really bald.
I'm truly bald.
Great. I mean, it's
I'm
great.
balder than you.
You are balder than me.
Only on Bald Talk. Campfire.